Imagine a Roman general sharpening his mind before battle, not with a sword, but with silence and a journal. Now picture, half a world away, a Japanese samurai meditating under cherry blossoms, visualizing death so clearly he no longer fears it. Different cultures, different continents, but the same unshakable code. Two warriors, two traditions, one philosophy. Welcome to the Stoic Lighthouse, where ancient wisdom cuts through modern noise. If you're ready to build the kind of discipline that can survive chaos, make sure to like this video and subscribe, because this one will shift how you see life, death, and everything in between. The truth is, Marcus Aurelius and Miyamoto Musashi never met. They lived in different worlds, spoke different languages, and faced different enemies. But somehow, they arrived at the same battlefield of the soul. The Stoic emperor and the sword saint shared more than most people ever realize. They both believed that true strength came not from domination, but from self-mastery. They both used death not as a fear, but as a compass. They both rejected luxury and comfort as enemies of clarity. And they both walked a narrow path, where virtue, not victory, was the goal. According to Marcus Aurelius, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think. And from Miyamoto Musashi, think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world. Neither man was interested in empty rituals. They sought something deeper, a way to live so deliberately that even death had nothing left to take. In this video, we're going to explore 6 timeless principles that united the Stoic and the samurai. You'll discover how both philosophies used mortality as fuel, embraced duty over ego, mastered emotion like a blade, lived fully in the now, surrendered to fate without surrendering their values, and found power in simplicity. This is not a comparison, this is a revelation about a universal warrior code forged in fire, silence, and purpose. Let's begin. Number 1. Death is not the end, it's the beginning of wisdom. Most people run from death. They avoid it in conversation, deny it in their habits, and distract themselves from it with comfort and noise. But the Stoic and the samurai did the opposite. They woke up to it. They trained with it. They made death their advisor, their compass, and in many ways, their quietest ally. For the Stoics, the practice was called memento mori, not as a superstition, not as a death wish, but as a radical act of clarity. Remember, you must die. Not someday, not in old age, but possibly today. This wasn't just a phrase, it was an invitation to focus, to strip life down to its essentials. According to Seneca, let us prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing. That mindset, repeated daily, gave the Stoic warrior a sharpness most people never reach. Marcus Aurelius, facing plague, war, and political betrayal, did not use death as an excuse to panic. He used it as a reason to stay grounded, to make decisions based on virtue, not emotion, to waste no time on vanity, envy, or trivial opinions. Death made him real. On the other side of the world, a mirror image. The samurai, rooted in the fierce loyalty of Bushido, the warrior's way, they were taught that only by meditating on death could a man truly live. This wasn't metaphor, it was discipline. Yamamoto Tsunetomo opens the Hagakure with a line that shook generations. The way of the samurai is found in death. But here's the catch. They weren't obsessed with dying. They were obsessed with being ready. Death, to the samurai, wasn't something to fear or delay. It was a lens, a sharpening tool. If you acted as if you might die today, you didn't waste time. You didn't hesitate. You didn't lie to yourself. The Zen philosophy that influenced many samurai reinforced this idea through practice, not just words. Meditation on impermanence. Training in silence, rituals designed not to defeat death, but to stand beside it, unmoved. Epictetus, though never a soldier, trained his mind like a warrior. As a slave turned philosopher, he understood the constant threat of powerlessness and violence. And yet, he taught, "I cannot escape death, but I can escape the fear of it." This is the secret both warrior codes discovered. Death is only terrifying when you've lived without purpose, when your days have been spent chasing status or running from pain. But if your life is aligned with honor, with virtue, with duty, then death becomes just another step. Modern philosopher Donald Robertson reflects this in his commentary on Stoicism. Contemplating death isn't depressing. It's the anchor that stops you from drifting into triviality. Even Miyamoto Musashi, the undefeated sword master, saw death not as the enemy, but as a creative partner. In his later years, he withdrew from society and wrote The Dokodo, a short but powerful guide to living with resolve. One of his rules reads, "Think of death at all times." He wasn't being dramatic. He was being deliberate. Death, for Musashi, wasn't a threat. It was a motivator, a clarifier, a way to make sure every stroke of his sword, every decision of his life was honest. And today, most of us live like we have unlimited time. We make shallow decisions. We delay difficult conversations. We pretend we can afford to waste time because the illusion of control is comfortable. But both the Stoic and the samurai would call that blindness. They chose awareness. They trained for death by living fiercely. Now, because when death stops being the end, it becomes the beginning of wisdom. Number 2, purpose above self. Why warriors serve something greater. Once you've made peace with death, a new question rises from the silence. If my time is limited, what is worth giving it to? Both the Stoic and the samurai had an answer. And it wasn't pleasure, it wasn't popularity, it wasn't comfort, freedom, or even happiness. It was duty. For the Stoics, duty meant living in alignment with virtue, not as an abstract ideal, but as a practical daily mission. They believed that only one thing was truly good, a virtuous character. Everything else, money, status, health, even life itself, was indifferent. They could be used well or poorly. What mattered was the intent, the soul behind the action. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, defined virtue as living according to nature, meaning living with reason, discipline, and moral clarity. This was further expanded by Chrysippus, who argued that virtue was the only thing truly under our control. According to Chrysippus, he who sins is more unfortunate than he who is sinned against, because to act against virtue was worse than to suffer injustice. Why? Because your character is your only real possession. The Stoic path focused on 4 cardinal virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. Not one of them is about feeling good. All of them are about doing good, especially when it's difficult. That's where true strength lives. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, just that you do the right thing, the rest doesn't matter. On the other side of the world, the samurai lived by a similar code, but instead of virtue, their central principle was giri, a complex word that translates loosely as duty, loyalty, and moral obligation. But giri was more than that. It was the silent contract between the warrior and the world. It bound him to his clan, his lord, and his code. Breaking it was worse than death. Inazo Nitobe, in his book Bushido, The Soul of Japan, captured this mindset perfectly. To the samurai, duty was more than life. The individual was nothing. Honor was everything. This is where the Stoic and the samurai meet. A life lived for something higher than the self. Whether that was service to virtue or to a code of honor, both warriors understood the same law. The ego is too small a god to worship. When you only serve yourself, your life shrinks. When you serve something greater, your life expands with meaning. This is why Epictetus could say, despite being a slave, "What is yours? Your moral purpose. That's the only thing you possess fully." He saw himself as a soldier in the service of reason and virtue. He was loyal not to emperors, but to principles. Modern philosopher Jordan B. Peterson echoes this ancient truth when he says, "The purpose of life is not happiness. It is to find the heaviest burden you can carry and bear it with dignity. The Stoic carried the burden of justice in an unjust empire. The samurai carried the burden of honor in a violent and chaotic world. And in that burden, they found identity, focus, direction. Compare that with today's culture, a world chasing dopamine, avoiding discomfort, worshipping self-care, but ignoring self-discipline. The result? A generation exhausted by meaninglessness. Because we were not built to float, we were built to serve, not in chains, but in chosen purpose. Ryan Holiday brings this home when he writes, "Your purpose is not to be successful, your purpose is to be useful, to serve, to contribute." The Stoic and the samurai would agree, because when you anchor your life in purpose, not mood, not pleasure, not applause, then you become something dangerous, something unshakable, something rare. You become the kind of person who doesn't just survive chaos, but brings order into it. Number 3, sharpen the mind like a blade. Mastery begins within. A sword in the hands of an unstable man is just a disaster waiting to happen. That's why neither the Stoic nor the samurai trained only their reflexes. They trained their perception, their judgment, their inner stillness. To them, mastery didn't start with the body. It started with the mind. The Stoics called this inner command hegemonikon, the ruling faculty. It was the seat of reason and the source of your choices. To them, controlling your external environment was far less important than commanding your internal world, because that's where every decision, every reaction, every downfall begins. Cleanthes, the second head of the Stoic school after Zeno, warned, "It is not the act that troubles us, but the picture we form of it." In other words, what breaks you isn't what happens, it's how you see it. That's why the Stoics didn't waste time blaming fortune. They trained their minds to stand unmoved, like a lighthouse in a storm. Musonius Rufus, the teacher of Epictetus and one of the most practical Stoics, was relentless on this point. The soul that has been trained and disciplined will not be overcome by misfortune, for it possesses strength not granted by luck. He believed philosophy wasn't for debate, it was for preparation. Like a warrior training before battle, the philosopher had to be ready to meet insults with silence, pain with dignity, and temptation with restraint. Meanwhile, in feudal Japan, the samurai were building the same fortress, not with logic, but with presence. Their ideal mental state was called mushin, no mind. A mind free from clutter, from fear, from hesitation. It was cultivated through meditation, through the ritual of the sword, through total immersion in action. When a samurai faced death, there was no time to weigh options. The mind had to be calm, empty, and ready. The Zen master Takuan Soho taught, when the mind stops on something, it becomes attached to it. That attachment freezes the warrior. He becomes vulnerable. This is exactly what the Stoics meant by being ruled by passions. Whether it's anger, fear, desire, or pride, the moment you're trapped by emotion, you lose freedom. And when you lose freedom, you lose precision. Aristo of Chios, a fierce early Stoic who emphasized ethical purity, warned, "Freedom is not in doing what you like, but in not being a slave to your impulses." This was echoed by the samurai in practice. They stripped emotion from combat, not because they didn't feel, but because they couldn't afford to be controlled. Their calm in the face of death wasn't apathy, it was discipline. In today's world, most people are trained to react. A comment on social media, a traffic delay, a rejection. And just like that, the mind spins out of control. But the Stoic and the samurai offer a path back, the training of the mind, daily, deliberately. Modern author Massimo Pigliucci, one of today's leading interpreters of Stoicism, writes, "The Stoic practice is not to escape life, but to engage with it more skillfully. And skill, both in war and in life, comes from control, not of others, but of yourself." Imagine this. Two warriors stand in silence. One is surrounded by chaos, but his breath is steady. The other holds his sword, but his eyes are clear. They've both fought this battle before, not outside, but within. That's where true victory is forged. To live like them is to sharpen the mind every day, not into a weapon of reaction, but into a blade of awareness. Number 4, there is only now. Perfection demands presence. A distracted warrior is a dead warrior. Whether standing on the battlefield or navigating daily life, the enemy is never just out there. It's the 1,000 voices in your head pulling you out of the present moment. And both the Stoic and the samurai knew. If your attention is scattered, your actions will be sloppy. If your mind is elsewhere, your soul is nowhere. For the Stoics, the present wasn't just a moment in time. It was a sacred ground. It was the only place where virtue could be practiced. The past was gone, and the future wasn't promised. Only the now could be acted upon with intention, with clarity, with justice. Heracles, a lesser-known but deeply practical Stoic, emphasized the idea of concentric circles, starting from the self and radiating outward to humanity. But to apply that wisely, one had to first be rooted in the here and now. He warned, "Let us embrace what is present and be content with what comes our way, for the future is always uncertain." It's a line that feels like it could have come from a Zen temple in Kyoto. And indeed, in Japan, the samurai built their entire philosophy of combat on presence. Their training wasn't just about slicing a target. It was about entering a state where body and mind were fully unified with action. This was cultivated through rituals, calligraphy, the tea ceremony, and the sword. Miyamoto Musashi, who fought over 60 duels and never lost, understood this completely. In the Book of 5 Rings, he wrote, "When you attain the way of strategy, there will not be one thing you cannot see. You must study this deeply." He wasn't talking about eyesight. He was talking about perception, the ability to fully engage with the moment, to respond without panic, to act without noise. Stoics believed the same. Posidonius, a polymath of the Stoic school who also influenced Cicero and Seneca, tied attention to mastery. He taught that the wise man sees what others overlook, not because he's smarter, but because he's not distracted. And that's the real issue today. We live in a world engineered to steal our presence. Notifications, multitasking, doom scrolling. Shiny objects pretending to be opportunities. In that environment, trying to live with excellence becomes almost impossible, unless, like the Stoic and the samurai, we fight back with full focus. William B. Irvine reminds us, "A Stoic tries to live each moment as if it were a masterpiece, complete, deliberate, and final." There's power in that sentence, because it reveals a radical idea. Your best life is not lived in someday. It's lived in now. When the samurai entered battle, they didn't worry about surviving. They focused on striking. When the Stoic faced a dilemma, he didn't obsess about future regret. He asked, "What does virtue require of me right now?" And then he did it. Modern author Ryan Holiday translates this into a language anyone can understand. The moment is all we have. Waste it and you'll regret it. Own it and you'll rise. To be present isn't passive. It's not sitting still waiting for peace to find you. It's an act of aggressive clarity. It's confronting distraction with awareness. It's cutting through noise like a sword through silk. It's understanding that the quality of your life, your relationships, your work, your integrity, is just the sum of how you show up in each moment. The Stoic and the samurai didn't seek escape. They sought readiness, and readiness is always right now. Number 5, detach from outcome. Flow with fate, fight with honor. A warrior who does everything right but is crushed by fear of the outcome has already lost. It doesn't matter how perfect your plan is, how strong your resolve, or how clear your intention. If you cling to the result, you give your power away. The Stoic and the samurai both understood a deeper truth. You are not owed the fruits of your labor, only the chance to labor well. In Stoicism, this idea is woven into the very fabric of their worldview. The universe was seen as governed by logos, a rational order that you couldn't control, only align with. You don't get to dictate the outcome. You only get to choose your actions, your character, your discipline. Cleanthes, the second head of the Stoic school after Zeno, captured this with poetic brilliance when he wrote, "Lead me, Zeus, and you, O destiny, wherever you have assigned me. I shall follow without hesitation." This wasn't surrender. It was mature cooperation with the nature of reality. A man who fights fate loses twice. But a man who flows with it, with courage and integrity, becomes unstoppable in a different way. In the same breath, the samurai embraced the impermanence of life through a powerful cultural phrase, shikata ga nai. It means, it cannot be helped. But this isn't passive defeatism. It's active acceptance. It's the mind saying, I did everything I could, now I move forward without complaint. Yamamoto Tsunetomo in the Hagakure reinforces this when he says, matters will not go as you expect. The essence of strategy is to accept this with an unshaken heart. To the samurai, clinging to outcome was the enemy of fluid movement, clean thought, and courageous presence. You couldn't fight clean if you were panicking about death. You couldn't serve honorably if your mind was obsessed with reward. Musonius Rufus, always direct and practical, echoes this beautifully. The man who trains to endure hardship does not complain when it comes. He welcomes it as the sharpening of his soul. This is the secret both warrior codes shared. When you stop clinging to what might happen, you start acting from who you are. The samurai trained for years, knowing a single duel might end them. The Stoic practiced discomfort daily, knowing that wealth, friends, or freedom could vanish in a moment. What remained was the attitude, the spirit, that no one could take away. Donald Robertson ties this to modern Stoic practice. We must learn to act without attachment to success or fear of failure. That is where our freedom lies. Today, we're told to obsess over results, the likes, the money, the trophies, the titles. But the Stoic and the samurai both reject that. They say, fight well, live well, let the rest unfold as it will. When you stop fearing the outcome, you become dangerous, not reckless, but unshakable. You move through life like a sword through water. Not because you don't care, but because your care is rooted in something deeper than results, honor. So act, commit, pour your soul into what you do, and then let go. Number 6, simplicity is strength. Cut the excess, keep the essence. In a world drunk on more things, more comfort, more noise, the Stoic and the samurai stood apart. They chose less, not out of poverty, not out of denial, but out of clarity. Because to them, luxury wasn't a reward, it was a threat. The Stoics practiced voluntary discomfort. They fasted, slept on hard surfaces, walked barefoot, and wore simple clothes, not to punish themselves, but to inoculate their minds against dependency. They knew that when you rely on pleasure for peace, you give your peace away. Musonius Rufus, perhaps the most hands-on of the Roman Stoics, made this clear. If you become accustomed to simple living, you will not feel want, nor will you fear poverty. To him, comfort made you soft, mentally, morally, even spiritually. The more you had, the more you feared losing it. But if you needed little, you feared nothing. And a person who fears nothing is truly free. This was echoed centuries later in feudal Japan. The samurai, especially during long stretches of peace, often lived lives of austere beauty. Influenced by Zen Buddhism, they embraced a philosophy called wabi-sabi, the appreciation of simplicity, imperfection, and impermanence. It wasn't about poverty, it was about precision. A cracked bowl, a faded scroll, a rough ceramic teacup. Each object was a meditation. Enough is enough. Miyamoto Musashi, despite being the most feared swordsman of his time, spent his final years in solitude, painting, writing, and reflecting. In his Dokudo, he writes, "Do not seek pleasure for its own sake. Do not hold on to possessions you no longer need." He wasn't rejecting joy. He was rejecting attachment to things, to cravings, to anything that dulled the edge of the mind or slowed the hand of action. This is where the Stoic and the samurai converge with force. They knew that clarity comes through subtraction. The less you carry, the faster you move. The fewer distractions you allow, the sharper your aim. Modern minimalist Joshua Fields Millburn, though far from a warrior, channels the same ancient wisdom when he writes, "Minimalism is not about having less. It's about making room for more of what matters." And what matters? For the Stoic, virtue. For the samurai, honor. For both, clarity of mind, discipline of spirit, precision of action. Simplicity wasn't aesthetic, it was tactical. In today's culture, simplicity is often mistaken for lack. But for these ancient warriors, it was the ultimate power move. To live simply was to prove to the world, I don't need your noise, I don't need your prizes. I have my path, I walk it clean. Because at the end of the day, discipline dies in comfort. Purpose fades in luxury, and the soul rusts when it's too protected from friction. So clean the excess, cut the noise, sharpen your life until only what matters remains. 2 men, 2 worlds, 1 legacy. A philosopher emperor who ruled the known world, a swordsman who mastered death with silence and steel. One wrote with ink, the other with blood. But both lived by a code that refused to bend to fear, chaos, or ego. And now, centuries later, their teachings have returned, not in armor but in urgency. You see, this isn't just ancient history, it's a mirror. Because today, the battlefield has changed. You're not holding a gladius or a katana. You're holding your phone, your schedule, your thoughts. But the war is still the same, a war against distraction, cowardice, and the slow death of meaning. The Stoic and the samurai already showed us the way. They trained their minds to stand firm in the face of death. They carried a mission heavier than their own comfort. They silenced the noise of the world to sharpen their presence. They fought, not for victory, but for virtue. And they let go of the outcome, walking straight into fate with a clear conscience, all while living with less, so they could live with more purpose. And now, the question echoes through the ages. Will you pick up that code? Not because it's easy, but because it's right. If this message sparked something inside you, a reminder, a challenge, a call, then let us know in the comments. Which of the 6 principles resonated most with your current battle? And if you believe someone you care about could benefit from hearing this code, share this video with them. Be the reason they remember who they are. Tap like, hit subscribe, and let the Stoic Lighthouse guide you in the storm. In our next video, we'll uncover the story of a forgotten warrior of the mind, the philosopher who rebuilt Stoicism from the ashes. While others faded into fame, he worked in silence. But without him, there would be no Marcus Aurelius, no Epictetus, no Stoic revival. You may not know his name, but soon you won't forget it. Always remember, the world doesn't need more opinions. It needs more warriors who live by a code, even when no one is watching. See you in the next video.